I'm your bedtime historian, and tonight I'm wondering, why do we still flinch at shadows that never existed? A marble temple, flickering oil lamps, whispers of things with scales and wings that slip between waking and sleep. The Greeks carved fears into stone monsters, then blamed them for everything they couldn't control. But why did they choose these creatures, and why do we keep dragging them back into our dreams? If that thought feels oddly comforting, maybe tap, like and subscribe. Let this channel guard your sleep the way Cerberus guards Hades. While you're here half awake, tell me, who's the scariest myth you secretly wish was real? Now pull your blanket a little tighter and step with me into an age where the monsters were only the beginning. You walk through the dark corridors of an ancient Greek sanctuary, cool marble beneath your feet, shadows flickering across frescoes of impossible beasts. Each painting tells you a secret fear is easier to worship when it has scales and claws. The people here lived with the constant dread of storms, earthquakes, plagues, things they couldn't see coming. So they made monsters to carry that dread for them. Some scholars argue these stories were survival guides, warnings hidden in fangs and wings. Others insist they were only bedtime tales, distractions for restless minds when the wind howled outside clay walls. But the truth drifts somewhere between. A statue of Medusa greets you in the corner, hair alive, with snakes frozen mid-hiss. You pause, half expecting her to blink. One flick of her eyes, they said, and a hero turns to stone. Why imagine such terror? Maybe it was the Greeks' way of explaining the unexplainable, why some warriors never returned from quests, why some secrets stay buried in caves no map can find. A moth circles an oil lamp, tiny wings casting giant shadows. Just like that, you see how monsters grow a serpent here, a lion's mane there, stitched together in whispered stories, until they slither into your dreams. Historians still debate how much of these fears came from older cultures, Babylonian dragons, Egyptian hybrid gods, or if the Greeks invented their own brand of nightmare. Either way, they knew one thing: fear binds people together. A village that shares a monster shares the comfort of surviving it too. You lean closer to the wall, tracing the painted outline of a Hydra heads, multiplying each time you slice one off. A lesson hidden in the horror: cut one threat, two more appear. Maybe they were warning each other about wars, about hunger, about how trouble never dies alone. Somewhere beyond the temple doors, thunder murmurs over olive groves. The people here would have said it was Zeus throwing a tantrum. Easier to blame a god than admit the sky just does what it wants, and easier still to imagine a monster lurking in the storm than to accept that fear lives in your own chest. So you stand here in the hush of marble columns and painted eyes that watch you back. Maybe these monsters were never real. Or maybe they're more real than we'd like, clinging to the dark corners of our minds, shape-shifting every time we need something to blame. Outside, the wind rattles a bronze gate. You turn away from the statues, but they stay with you, sleeping inside the next story, ready to wake when you need them again. A hush settles over the temple as you step deeper, and the first thing you see is her Medusa. Not just a statue now, but a figure flickering in your mind's eye scales, shifting eyes waiting. They say a single glance could freeze the bravest hero mid-stride, life turned to stone before a final breath could escape. You wonder, why give one creature so much power? Maybe the Greeks needed a reminder that courage has limits, even when you wear bronze armor and claim favor from Athena herself. A breeze slips through the broken roof, brushing your cheek like a warning. You stand before Medusa's shrine, imagining the priests whispering prayers to keep her wrath at bay. She wasn't always a monster. Some stories claim she was a beautiful maiden, cursed by a jealous goddess for the crime of being too alluring. Historians still argue whether this was punishment or a lesson beauty turned deadly to remind men what happens when they stray too close to divinity. By torchlight, you trace her snakes, each one coiled, fanged alive in painted marble. A quirkier legend says her severed head still held power, carried by Perseus in a sack used like a divine weapon to petrify enemies and beasts alike. Imagine carrying fear in your bag, like a charm, unleashing it only when you've run out of sword and wit. Some scholars remain puzzled by how a woman became the face of so much dread. Was it fear of feminine power, or a deeper anxiety that beauty itself is a trap? There's no consensus, only echoes of old debates whispered through broken pillars. In your mind's eye, you see Perseus sneaking through the shadows, shield polished like a mirror, eyes fixed on the ground to avoid her deadly gaze. It's almost laughable, heroes armed to the teeth, yet undone by one reflected glance. You shift your weight, feeling how fear doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers, coils around your ankles, freezes you mid-step. Imagine villagers gathered at night retelling this tale by flickering hearthlight. A child asks, could she turn you to stone from a dream? An elder nods, letting that chill settle in young bones. Fear teaches obedience. Don't stray too far. Don't anger the gods. Don't stare too long into things you can't comprehend. You picture Medusa's sisters, Stheno and Euryale, lurking at the edge of the story, equally cursed but rarely named. Forgotten monsters guarding the line between myth and nightmare. Did they envy their sister's fame? Or did they hiss curses into the wind, glad no hero came for their heads? The scrolls disagree, each scribe adding a twist, each tale growing new scales and fangs over centuries. A snake drops from the rafters, and your imagination lands softly at your feet. You flinch only to remember it's all marble and paint, yet your pulse doesn't care. Medusa's power endures even when reduced to stone and story. Outside, a crow cries in the olive grove, a feather drifting down like a dropped thought. You wonder if some fears are too useful to ever fade, if monsters like Medusa survive because we still need them, frozen reminders that danger often wears a beautiful face. You turn from her shrine, the air thick with whispers you can't translate. One more glance over your shoulder, just to be sure she hasn't moved. The oil lamps flicker, shadows twist, but the Gorgon stays stone, waiting for the next dreamer to wander too close. You slip past Medusa's cold stare deeper into shadowed corridors, where the air tastes like burnt offerings and old secrets. Here stands Cerberus. 3 heads, 1 mission. Keep the dead where they belong. You pause at the painted depiction of the hound, each snarling maw frozen in a snarl that's somehow more tired than terrifying. Guarding the gates of Hades must wear a beast out sniffing at souls, barking at escapees, gnashing teeth at any hero bold enough to think they could bargain with the underworld. Some say Cerberus's 3 heads see past, present, and future at once. Others claim each head devours a different kind of sin: betrayal, violence, cowardice. Historians still bicker over the origins. Was he borrowed from older tales of multi-headed beasts or purely Greek? There's no neat answer, only more scratch marks in the dirt of mythology. You crouch by the painted riverbank where the artist captured Cerberus snapping at the hem of Orpheus's cloak. Poor Orpheus, lyre in hand, heart full of foolish hope. He tried to soothe the monstrous guard with music, and for a breathless moment it worked. Imagine strings trembling in the underworld's stale air, a lullaby so sweet that even three heads dipped in drowsy agreement. A love song strong enough to hush fear itself at least until the last note faded. A soft laugh escapes you. A monstrous dog pacified by a lullaby. What a strange comfort. You wonder if the Greeks made Cerberus so fearsome because they needed to believe their underworld was secure. After all, what's more terrifying than a soul that wanders back half alive, half rotting, haunting the living? Easier to picture a three-headed mutt keeping the dead in line. Nearby, a tiny detail, an ancient artist scribbled a collar on Cerberus's neck. Did the Greeks imagine him chain-tamed? Or was that collar a reminder that even monsters serve someone, Hades' brooding god of shadows who doesn't trust the dead to stay put? Scholars continue to debate if the collar was literal or symbolic, a nod to the Greeks' need to bind fear, to name it, to leash it. Your gaze drifts to the flickering torchlight, dancing across painted jaws. Each head snarls at ghosts you can't see. Maybe you'd need three heads too, if your job was guarding the living from the truth, that death never really stays behind a gate. A breeze curls through the corridor, rustling brittle papyrus scrolls stacked near the altar. Someone once etched warnings onto those scrolls, rituals offerings chants, to keep Cerberus from prowling the mortal realm. Farmers in distant villages left scraps of meat at crossroads, hoping to appease the guardian hound. Better a bone tossed to the shadows than a nightmare gnawing at your sleep. You imagine standing at the edge of the Styx-Charon's boat, rocking gently, while Cerberus watches you with eyes that never close. Does he judge you worthy to pass? Or does he wonder why mortals keep daring to peek behind the final curtain? You shift your weight on the cold stone floor, feeling the tickle of that question beneath your skin. Some nights, you suspect Cerberus isn't there to keep the dead in. He's there to keep your mind from wandering too far into what waits beyond your last breath. One bark, and you turn back to your daily troubles, taxes, neighbors, the next harvest. All mundane fears compared to the black river behind the gate. You step away from the painting, three pairs of eyes, following you as you move. In the dark hush, you swear you hear a low growl, but it's only the wind worrying at cracked columns. Cerberus stays behind, faithful, as fear itself unchained only when your thoughts drift too close to the edge of sleep. A hush settles over your thoughts as you wander from Cerberus's cold stare to the next painted horror, the Lernaean Hydra. Here the walls bloom with twisting necks, each one crowned by a snapping, venomous head. A monster that refuses to die cleanly, no matter how sharp the blade. The Hydra lurks at the edge of a murky swamp in your mind, a serpent so stubborn that every decapitation doubles its fury. Heroes arrive certain they'll conquer it with a single swing. But the Hydra reminds them some threats only multiply the harder you fight. You lean in close to the mural, tracing the loops of its coiled body's scales glistening with paint, older than the temples that hold them. The story always starts with Heracles' mighty lion-skinned club in hand. Tasked with destroying the beast as one of his 12 labors, he trudges into the marsh with fire in his belly and fear hidden behind his famous grin. A torch flares at your side, an offering left by some anxious pilgrim. Its flicker casts the Hydra's heads into motion. On the wall, a writhing tangle of teeth and hiss. Historians still debate if this monster was just a cautionary tale against hubris, or if villagers near the swamps really believed they'd find fanged shadows waiting in the reeds. A strange little detail. Some say the Hydra's blood was so poisonous that Heracles dipped his arrows in it after the battle, making every shot deadly long after the beast's last breath. One monster's venom turned into a hero's secret weapon, fear bottled, repurposed, and carried into new battles. There's something darkly funny about it, you think. Cut off one head, two more rise, then pocket the poison for later use. A cycle of fear that feeds itself. Even heroes need something monstrous in their back pocket when courage alone won't do. You imagine the villagers gathering by lantern light, whispering about the swamp, that stank of rot and danger. Children clutching their mothers when the wind rustled the cattails too loudly. Was that a snake or something worse? Better to believe a hero could solve it all with a flaming brand and brute strength than admit some threats can't be killed at all. A breeze ripples through the hall, lifting dust motes like swamp fog. You half expect to hear a hiss behind you, but it's only your own breath shallow in the chill air. The Hydra remains pinned to the stone, its endless heads frozen mid-snap, still hungry after centuries. Some scholars remain puzzled about why the Greeks fixated on multiplying monsters. Perhaps they saw the Hydra in every problem, political unrest, plagues family feuds. Cut one trouble down, and another sprouts up uglier and more determined. It's a lesson that echoes even now. Fear finds a way to regrow. You drift back from the wall, fingers tingling with the imagined bite of scales and teeth. Somewhere beyond this painted corridor, a swamp still waits in the darkness of your mind, thick with secrets, buzzing with unseen threats. The Hydra curls in those shadows, heads coiling tighter each time you pretend you've conquered every worry. One last look at the monster's looping necks, and you swear they shift under your gaze. One head turns, maybe too hungry, for the warmth of your next nightmare. You smile at the thought's strange comfort in knowing some fears can't ever be fully slain. They're part of the story, and you're the one who keeps telling it. The torch flickers out behind you, and you step onward, deeper into this painted bestiary of borrowed nightmares and half-tamed monsters toward the next beast already waiting for you just beyond the shadowed arch. You ease around the corner, footsteps muffled by centuries of dust, and meet a creature stitched together from nightmares the Chimera. It crouches on a faded fresco, all snarls, and fire its lion's mane, tangled with goat's fur and serpent scales. One beast, three beasts, none of them kind. In the flicker of your torchlight, the Chimera's eyes glint as if it might leap from stone to flesh at any moment. Ancient Greeks spun this terror from spare parts, the brute strength of a lion, the stubborn will of a goat, the venomous surprise of a snake for a tail. Some say they feared these hybrids most of all, unnatural combinations that broke the rules of nature they clung to so desperately. A dry wind drifts through the corridor, carrying the scent of charred offerings. You almost taste the soot and smoke that once rose from altars meant to appease such monsters. A single roar they believed could turn a thriving village to cinders. You stand before the mural, picturing Bellerophon, astride Pegasus' spear in hand wings, beating above scorched earth. They say he soared high enough to strike the Chimera from the clouds. Some scholars argue whether this tale was meant to warn mortals about arrogance flying too close to the realm of gods, or to promise that monsters can be slain if your aim is true and your steed divine. There's never quite agreement, just smudged ink and battered scrolls. A tiny detail hidden in the painting makes you smile the goat head, jutting awkwardly from the Chimera's back eyes, wide as if even it's confused about its place in this stitched-together terror. Maybe that's the secret. Fear grows more monstrous when it doesn't make sense. One head belches flame, another bleats, and the serpent tail hisses with envy. Three hungers, fighting for one body. The villagers who whispered this tale at dusk surely saw more than just scorched fields. They saw droughts, wildfires, storms that devoured crops, forces beyond reason or control. The chimera gave shape to chaos itself, a living excuse for when careful plans turned to ash overnight. You wonder if the Greeks ever sat by their hearths and asked what if the real monster is mixing what should never be mixed. A lion should hunt alone. A goat should graze quietly. A snake should slither unseen. But bind them together, and you get something that breathes destruction. Some researchers still debate whether the chimera was inspired by distant rumors of exotic beasts stitched together in drunken tales by traders returning from Persia or Anatolia. Your fingers brush the cold stone, feeling the faint ridges where artists once chiseled flames into permanence. It's almost funny trying to trap fire in rock, but the chimera's breath lives on, flickering in nightmares, ready to spark when you lie awake at night, wondering what strange, impossible disaster might come for you next. Somewhere in the shadows, you hear the faint echo of a bleat. Or maybe it's your own heartbeat, stuttering at the idea that monsters might not die so easily when you wake. The Greeks may have slain their chimera with a hero on a winged horse, but you suspect it still prowls the edges of every wildfire, every sudden ruin left behind by a spark. You step back one last glance at the tangled trio of heads frozen mid-roar. The lion snarls, the goat grimaces, the serpent curls its tail in silent warning. You turn away before the mural's warmth convinces you the flames are real. Better to leave the chimera in its painted prison than carry its fire into the next restless dream. And so, you move on, deeper still, where the maze grows tighter, and the next beast waits horns sharp and walls closing in. You step out of the chimera's scorched breath and into the tight hush of winding stone walls, pressing close turns so sharp they swallow your torchlight whole. Here the air shifts stale with secrets, and you find yourself at the mouth of the labyrinth. Somewhere inside lurks the Minotaur, half man, half bull, wholly trapped in a story meant to never let him out. Your fingers trail the maze's first wall, cold and damp. The Greeks built this riddle of corridors on Crete, or so the myths claim, King Minos's cruel masterpiece designed to hide what he'd rather not admit existed. The Minotaur born from tangled gods and mortal folly, a child cursed with horns and hunger. Some historians still argue whether he was punishment for a queen's transgression or a symbol of a kingdom's tangled politics. Truth is, the beast and the maze grew together, fear-given walls to echo through. A soft drip echoes in the stone like footsteps far ahead. You imagine Theseus' torch-guttering thread unspooling behind him. Ariadne's cleverness, his only hope to retrace his steps if he survived. Even now, the twist of string feels more powerful than the hero's sword. Maybe the monster wasn't the only trap. Maybe the labyrinth was a lesson in how easily courage unravels when you're lost. The mural before you shows the Minotaur mid-charge horns, lowered hooves digging into marble dust. A closer look reveals a detail easy to miss, a tiny stylized thread winding around the beast's foot. A reminder that every nightmare has an exit if you dare enough to follow it. You stand in this imagined corridor and taste the fear of a boy alone in the dark walls, shifting every turn a chance to double back into the beast's waiting snarl. Some scholars remain puzzled why the Greeks clung so tightly to this half-human terror. Was it guilt? A way to trap the monstrous within stone rather than within themselves? Or simply a story to warn that sometimes The things you bury deepest are the hardest to kill. Some villagers once believed the Minotaur's roar could be heard at night if the wind carried right echoes slipping from palace walls to frighten children into staying close to hearth and family. Stray too far, and the labyrinth swallows you whole. Fear as a leash, myth as a fence. A strange whisper tickles your ear, your own thought, reminding you that in the end, Theseus slew the bull-headed terror, but the maze stayed standing. Heroes come and go. The walls remain. You wonder what that says about the monsters we build for ourselves, how easy it is to cut one down, how impossible it is to step out of our own winding corridors. The torch trembles in your hand as you trace a faint line on the stone Ariadne's thread, or your own. You imagine how many souls lost themselves here, chasing shadows, horns scraping just out of reach until fear turned the maze itself into a living thing. Outside the painted walls, there were real mazes palaces, with so many rooms they felt like riddles. Archaeologists still debate if the labyrinth was inspired by Knossos' sprawling halls or by something older, deeper, never quite mapped. Maybe the true maze is the mind twists of regret, hidden passages of what-ifs, a minotaur waiting at the center horns, lowered at your secrets. You press your palm flat to the wall, feeling the cold calm of stone that has trapped this story for millennia. One last glance at the minotaur frozen mid-charge, the red thread brushing his hoof, like a promise that there's always a way out if you dare not to lose yourself along the turns. You step away, torch flickering, as the corridors open wider, carrying you forward toward the next impossible danger, where cliffs and currents wait to swallow ships whole. A salt-laced breeze brushes your cheek as the stone maze fades behind you, and now the walls open wide, no corridors here, only the endless churn of the sea. You stand on the rocky prow of a painted ship, sails straining as it drifts between two nightmares. Scylla on one side, Charybdis on the other. Your eyes linger on the mural's jagged blues and swirling grays, waves rising like claws, shadows writhing beneath the painted foam. Scylla six heads snapping from a cliffside, each hungry for sailors who stray too close. Charybdis, a whirlpool that swallows ships, whole spits splintered timbers back like bones. The Greeks knew these dangers well real, and imagined currents that turned a calm crossing into a grave. You imagine Odysseus at the tiller brow, furrowed, choosing which doom to flirt with. Some scholars still debate whether these monsters were just poetic stand-ins for reefs and tides, natural threats made monstrous so they could be blamed when brave men vanished beneath the waves. Or perhaps Scylla and Charybdis were older shadows, borrowed from whispered fears that the deep always hides more teeth than it shows. A soft wave crashes in your ear, though the sea here is only painted pigment on crumbling plaster. You wonder how many sailors clutched an amulet to their chest, muttering prayers as their boat scraped too close to Scylla's cliff. Better to lose a man or two to snapping jaws than risk Charybdis's swirling throat swallowing the whole crew. You lean closer to the wall, tracing Scylla's 6 serpent necks, each crowned by a snarling dog's head, an unnatural horror born from sailors' nightmares, and the Greeks' genius for shaping fear into flesh. Her lower body is hidden in the rock, a reminder that some threats stay half seen, half guessed, lurking where you can't quite aim your spear. A quirkier detail catches your eye. Tiny fish painted, darting around Charybdis's swirling maw, their silver scales calm despite the chaos. Some say Charybdis was once a woman cursed by Zeus for her insatiable thirst. There's no consensus, just arguments scribbled in old margins about how she became a monster that drinks the sea itself 3 times a day. You step back, the painted deck creaking beneath your mind's feet. You feel the sailor's choice pressing at your shoulders: veer too close to Scylla and sacrifice a few, or gamble everything on Charybdis's mercy and risk losing it all. A choice between bad and worse, a monster on both sides. Maybe the Greeks invented these sea fiends because they knew life at sea was never calm for long. Some nights, villagers claimed you could hear Scylla's shriek in the wind or see Charybdis's mouth opening when the tide pulled too fast. Wives waiting on the shore might blame the monsters when husbands never returned. Grief poured into stories, so the sea didn't seem so cruel without reason. Historians still argue if these tales were maps of real straits. Maybe the Strait of Messina, maybe somewhere older. The debate doesn't matter much when the waves rise and a single bad choice can drown you just the same. You close your eyes and feel the ship's timbers under your feet, the spray of salt against your face, the cold certainty that sometimes survival means steering into the lesser nightmare. Monsters don't always roar. Sometimes they wait in silence, tugging your rudder, testing your nerve. A final glance at the painted heads snapping at passing sails. Somewhere in your mind's tide, Scylla watches with hungry eyes, while Charybdis churns beneath, ready to pull you down if you drift too close. You steady yourself on the deck that isn't there, ready to sail onward into the next shadow, where sisters of stone and scales wait to share Medusa's curse. The waves fade behind you as you step ashore, salt taste lingering on your tongue, while the air grows heavy with an older dread. Before you rises a weathered fresco. 3 faces stare back, snake hair twisting like brambles in a midnight garden. You know Medusa well enough now, but tonight you meet her sisters, Sthano and Euryale, the other Gorgon shadows often lost behind Medusa's fame. You lean closer. Their eyes are sharp cracked with age but still glinting with threat. Unlike Medusa, they were always monsters born with scales and fangs, no tragic transformation to soften their legend. Some scholars argue that makes them more terrifying creatures who never asked to be human, never pretended to be anything but curses wrapped in flesh. A gust of stale air ruffles your hair as you trace the painted outlines of their wings, bat-like torn at the edges, ready to carry them between realms. Imagine the hush of a village when someone vanished in the hills. A Gorgon took him, they'd whisper. Better to blame sisters of stone than admit some secrets vanish on their own. You catch a smaller detail tucked at the bottom of the mural. A tiny figure barely sketched Perseus again, sword at the ready, eyes averted. He faced Medusa sure, but her sisters. Most stories forget them, as if once the hero lifted her head from her shoulders, the tale ended neat and clean. But the myths say Stheno and Euryale howled their grief into the night chasing Perseus across sky and sea. They never found him, but maybe that wail still echoes coiled around ancient ruins. A quirky rumor, tucked in an old scroll, claims that drops of Medusa's blood spilled on the sand birthed serpents that slither still her sister's gift to the world, a final insult to heroes who thought monsters die so easily. Historians remain divided on whether this detail was moral magical or just a poet's flourish to give nightmares teeth long after the story ends. You step back from the wall, but their gaze holds you anyway, 3 pairs of eyes, each promising that some terrors can't be killed in daylight alone. You wonder if villagers ever imagined these sisters drifting among clouds, wings beating softly as they search for the man who stole their kin. Maybe that's why storms roll in with a sudden hiss, snake hair twisting the winds, demanding tribute in lightning and fear. There's something darkly comforting in knowing the Greeks never tidied their monsters away completely. Heroes may swing swords and claim trophies, but shadows slip through the cracks. Stheno and Euryale remind you that fear doesn't need to be fair to last. It just needs to find a corner of your mind, coil up there, and wait for night. Some storytellers argue the sisters were protectors in disguise, feral goddesses guarding secrets mortals shouldn't pry open. Others claim they're nothing but rage given wings. No agreement, just brushstrokes and broken amphorae, whispering old arguments to anyone who bothers to listen. You brush dust from your sleeve and imagine what it would feel like to meet those wings in a dream, silent leathery wrapping you up and carrying you somewhere you can't ever return from. Maybe that's what the Greeks feared most, that monsters can mourn too, and grief can hunt just as fiercely as hunger. A faint echo rolls through the chamber, wind-rattling tiles, or sisters hissing reminders that every hero's triumph costs something unseen. You stand still, the fresco's painted eyes flickering in the lamplight as if they're waiting for you to turn your back. You do, eventually stepping deeper into the next corridor, where a single eye stares from a giant's forehead, promising brute force and blind rage in the darkness ahead. You follow the cold stone path, deeper into the shadows, until the air opens wide around a figure so huge you feel small just thinking about it, a cyclops one eye glinting from a mural, where he towers over ships and sheep alike. One stare, one brute mind, enough strength to snap a hero's ribcage like driftwood. You lean closer to the painted brow, chipped and faded, but still fierce. This is Polyphemus, the Cyclops, who met Odysseus by the flicker of a cooking fire and wished he hadn't. Some say the Cyclopes were a race of builders' giants who helped shape the world's rough edges. But in Homer's telling, Polyphemus is no gentle mason. He's a shepherd who trades sheep's milk for human flesh, the mountain's echo of what happens when you trespass where you don't belong. A warm drift of torch smoke curls around you. You picture Odysseus and his men crammed inside the giant's cave, pressed into the stink of wool and raw meat, hoping Polyphemus stays blind to their trembling fear. Some scholars argue the Cyclops was more than just brute terror. Maybe he was an echo of isolation, a warning that without laws or city walls, even a giant becomes nothing but appetite in the dark. You notice a quirky scratch in the fresco, a tiny sheep perched smugly atop Polyphemus's shoulder. Maybe a bored artist's joke, maybe a nod to the trick Odysseus pulled, strapping himself beneath a ram's belly to slip past the giant's grasp. Fear makes you clever, the Greeks knew that well. Monsters sharpen the mind, even as they threaten to crush the skull. Some stories say Polyphemus wasn't alone. His brothers watched from distant hills, their single eyes blinking like watchfires in the dusk. But it's always this one Cyclops who lingers in the imagination. Maybe because Odysseus didn't kill him outright. He blinded him, left him roaring rage into the night, a wounded monster stumbling over rocks he once ruled with a lazy stomp. There's no neat end, just a raw reminder that some monsters survive long after your clever escape. A soft shuffle behind you, your own foot on loose stone, but you can almost hear the giant's grunt echo off these painted walls. The Cyclops' single eye seems to follow you, judging whether you'd be worth the trouble to chew. Historians still debate whether these one-eyed beasts came from sailors finding elephant skulls in Greek caves, large sockets, where trunks once were mistaken for eyes big enough to see your fear before you speak it. There's no final truth, only the comfort of knowing every monster has bones, somewhere real, or imagined, to anchor the story in your mind. You imagine villagers telling this tale by flickering hearths, children staring wide-eyed at the cave mouth just outside town. "Don't wander too close at dusk," they'd whisper. "The Cyclops hates to be disturbed at dinner." Fear like that keeps little feet close to home and grown men grateful for the thin safety of city gates. One last glance at the mural's cracked pupil, so wide, so empty, so filled with the promise that sometimes brute strength is all a nightmare needs to survive centuries. You wonder if Polyphemus still mutters Odysseus's name to the night wind, a blind giant, cursing a clever mortal who slipped through his fingers on a sheep's warm back. You step past the echo of wool and rock, the imagined smell of smoke and scorched bone, and move toward the next painted nightmare where wings and claws serenade sailors with songs too sweet to resist. The wind shifts, carrying you toward cliffs where beauty hums its deadliest note. The wind shifts from the dry hush of Cyclopean caves to a salty breeze carrying a melody so soft it curls around your ear like a secret. You step onto a painted shore cliffs, rising sharp and jagged as teeth, where the harpies and sirens wait, winged and scaled songstresses, ready to tangle your mind in notes you can't bear to resist. In the mural, the sirens perch on crags above a painted ship, their hair streaming like seaweed caught in a current, eyes half closed, as if they barely noticed the sailors wrecked below. Some say they were bird women, at first feathers for arms, talons for feet, human faces that hummed beauty into the wind. Others swear the sirens were fish-tailed sisters of mermaids, their songs drifting through brine and foam. Historians still argue over feathers or fins, but they agree on this: once you heard the song, you were lost. You lean closer, tracing the curling notes scratched into the fresco like drifting ribbons. Odysseus, clever as ever, knew better than to trust wax alone. He lashed himself to his masked ears unstuffed so he could taste the danger without drifting too close to the rocks. You imagine the struggle his crew, deaf to the siren's call muscles, straining at the oars while their captain screamed for freedom from his own bindings just to dive into ruin. A softer shadow flickers at the edge of the mural harpies, wheeling in the painted sky, claws outstretched. Not sweet-voiced like the sirens, but shrieking thieves' storms, with wings tearing food from tables, fouling what they couldn't carry away. They weren't just monsters for sailors. Farmers feared them too, blaming spoiled harvests on these screeching fiends. If your feast turned rotten, or your grain spoiled overnight, perhaps a harpy's wing brushed your roof while you slept. A quirky old tale claims the harpies were once fair maidens turned monstrous for failing some divine task. Or maybe they were always tempests given feathers. Some scholars remain puzzled that the Greeks bundled so many fears into wings: hunger storms, seduction, ruin. Maybe they knew that what flies in from nowhere often carries trouble you never see coming. A gentle breeze curls around your ankles as you stand on this painted cliff. You imagine sailors rowing blindfolded past rocky coasts, singing over the siren's song, just to drown out beauty that could dash their hulls to splinters. Funny how something lovely can shred your sails faster than any storm. In old villages, parents warned their children not to follow distant music in the hills. A lost lamb, a straying step. Maybe the harpies would lift you screaming into the night. Or worse, the sirens would lull you to sleep on a cliff's edge where the waves wait far below. A faint crack in the mural makes it look like a siren's smile is shifting alive for just a heartbeat, promising a melody you'd follow into the surf without regret. You shiver, half glad your ears hear only the echo of your own breath. Some say the sirens lived on islands littered with bones, proof that beauty has always been sharp beneath its softness. Others argue they were spirits of knowledge tempting mortals with secrets too heavy for human minds. Either way, the cliffs stand here, still painted, crumbling, humming in your imagination. You back away from the edge, the song lingering even as silence fills the corridor. The ship you stand on, real, only in your mind, turns its prow toward deeper myth, where the monsters aren't perched on cliffs, but stride the earth as giants that even gods feared to wake. The cliffs slip away behind you, leaving a hush that feels heavier than the siren's last lingering note. You step into a new chamber, the walls scorched with rough murals of scale claw and roaring wind. Here waits Typhon, father of monsters, the storm that dared to claw at Olympus itself. Before you sprawls his painted form so immense the artist ran out of plaster to hold him. A serpent's lower half coils like a nest of vipers. His arms stretch into storms. His mouth belches fire so fierce that the fresco's edges are charred black from candle smoke and centuries of fearful offerings. You stand small beneath him, imagining a world that trembled when he woke. Typhon wasn't a trickster serpent or a lurking swamp beast. He was an entire catastrophe wearing flesh and fang. Historians still puzzle over where his story begins. Some claim he was born of Gaia Earth herself to punish Zeus for locking away older, wilder gods. Others believe he rose from the chaos that the Greeks could never tame, a reminder that even Olympus sits on shaky ground. A cold breeze snakes along your neck, and you swear the mural's painted snakes flick their tongues at you. In the myth, Typhon thundered up from the earth and sent the gods scattering like startled deer. Only Zeus stood his ground, lightning in hand thunder, cracking through valleys as the two titans traded fear for fear. There's something strangely comforting in the idea that even gods fled screaming. Once in a while, immortals undone by a monster so big they could only run for cover. A quirky line in an old scroll mentions that when Typhon stormed Olympus, the gods disguised themselves as animals. Dionysus as a goat, Artemis as a cat, Apollo as a crow. Mighty beings, reduced to prey by the storm's roar. You lean closer to the fresco's swirling edges, noticing a tiny figure hidden near Typhon's talons, Zeus miniature and defiant, brandishing a lightning bolt like a shepherd's crook. Some scholars argue that Typhon's defeat was the last time chaos dared challenge order. Others insist the tale reminds us that catastrophe never truly dies. It just sleeps until the earth cracks wide enough to let it slither out again. Villagers once left burnt offerings at mountain caves thought to be Typhon's prison. If an earthquake shook the olive groves, or a sudden storm wrecked fishing boats, they'd mutter his name, imagining him shifting restlessly beneath their feet. It's easier to blame a monster's rumble than face the truth that nature cares nothing for prayers. Your fingers hover near the mural's cracked paint. Somewhere beneath layers of soot and candle wax, you see Typhon's eyes wide and empty like storm clouds about to burst. You wonder if fear of him made the Greeks build their temples, so solid stone, piled on stone, as if walls alone could hold back the earth's roar. Some nights thunder rolls over the ruins, and the wind slams shut ancient wooden doors. Superstition still clings to that sound, Typhon turning in his sleep, dreaming of the day the sky won't stop him. Even now, scholars argue if that dream ever truly ended. You step away from the painted storm shoes, scuffing dust that might once have been a sacrifice's ash. Typhon remains where he's always been, half nightmare, half explanation, for the moments when the ground quakes and you remember you're only human. One last glance at the mural's churning coils, the flicker of snakeheads frozen mid-hiss. Then you turn toward the next corridor. Ahead waits a quieter dread. No giant storms or snapping jaws this time, but something simpler animals mixed and matched in ways that never should be a reminder that the Greeks feared not just what nature made, but what it could become. You slip away from Typhon's swirling coils and find yourself standing before a series of smaller murals lined up like an ancient bestiary gone slightly mad. There's no single monster here roaring for attention, just a parade of hybrids stitched from beasts that never belonged together. A lion's mane on a serpent's spine, a horse with eagle wings, a stag with a scorpion's tail. The Greeks had a peculiar talent for taking nature's quiet order and shredding it into creatures that crawled and slithered across their dreams. You step closer to a painted griffin, its eagle head turned just enough to watch you back. The wings are spread wide, claws halfway sunk into a painted deer that looks surprised to be here at all. Why did these hybrids haunt Greek myths so stubbornly? Some scholars claim it's simple. The Greeks saw the world as a puzzle of pieces waiting to be shuffled. The more parts you fused, the more dangerous and fascinating the beast became. A lion alone was trouble enough. Add wings. Now fear could swoop down from clear skies when you least expected it. You run a finger over a cracked fresco of a hippogriff, horse's hooves, frozen mid-gallop, an eagle's beak snapping at prey that only exists in your imagination. Some villagers may have blamed creatures like this for missing livestock or sudden storms. A dead goat, torn fences, strange prints in the mud proof, enough that something impossible might lurk just beyond the olive grove. A softer rumor drifts through old scrolls. Maybe these creatures were symbols, not threats. The chimera you saw earlier was only the start. Hybrids reminded the Greeks that nature could be tamed in stories, but never fully trusted. Mix a goat and a serpent, and you get a warning. Don't assume you know what hides behind the next hill. A quirky detail makes you smile. On one edge of the mural, squeezed into a corner, almost as an afterthought, is a tiny painting of a centaur with an oversized wine jug. Not all hybrids were monsters in the Greek mind. Centaurs, half man and half horse, danced at festivals, offered wisdom or ruin depending on who you asked. Some scholars still argue whether centaurs were savage symbols of untamed nature or playful stand-ins for what happens when humans try to outrun their own wild instincts. A breeze slips through a cracked ceiling tile, rustling dust from the painted wings. You half expect one of these creatures to flex to leap free of the wall and test its impossible limbs. But they stay frozen feathers and claws pressed flat against the centuries. You imagine villagers swapping tails at dusk, children begging for the next monstrous combination. What if a snake had hooves? What if a wolf had horns? Fear becomes a bedtime game, a way to name the dark shapes that flicker at the edge of torchlight. Historians remain puzzled why these hybrids endured when simpler beasts, lions, wolves, boars already stalked Greek hills and forests. Perhaps real predators were too familiar to inspire the same awe. Or maybe the Greeks needed to believe they could mix their fears like clay, mold them into new shapes, and trap them in stories before they slithered back into the real world. You step back from the wall of mixed-up beasts, the painted griffin still eyeing you with its impossible eagle stare. You wonder if deep down, the Greeks knew they weren't just inventing monsters. They were warning themselves, nature doesn't care about neat categories. Sometimes the wild things break loose fuse together and become something you can't outrun. One last glance at the painted wings and claws, and then you turn toward the next corridor, where monsters step off the frescoes and into daily life woven into cracked rooftops, sudden storms, and strange shadows that never quite leave a village alone. The walls narrow again, the painted hybrids fading behind you as you step into a quieter chamber, one where monsters slip their scales and claws and wrap themselves around daily life instead. Here the frescoes are humbler scenes of simple Greek homes, goats grazing under olive trees, farmers tending vines under a brooding sky. And yet, tucked into corners and shadows, the monsters remain smaller now, but no less powerful. You pause before a mural of a tiny household shrine. A clay Gorgon mask hangs above a doorway, tongue stuck out, eyes wide, daring any bad luck to cross the threshold. Historians still debate whether these household Gorgons were meant to scare off real evil or just the neighbors' wandering envy. Either way, the message was clear. Fear lives here, fear keeps worse fears away. Your gaze drifts to a corner where a painted mother clutches a child while pointing at a serpent coiled near the hearth. The snake might be real. There were plenty slithering through Greek fields. But for the family who painted this scene, that snake could be a whisper of the Hydra, a flicker of Typhon's children creeping too close to the cooking fire. Monsters were never just for distant legends. They were excuses for a failed crop, an unexpected illness, a sudden storm that stole a fishing boat before dawn. A breeze stirs dust from a painted amphora stacked by the door. On its curve dances a tiny harpy, claws out mid-screech. Some villagers etched harpies onto pots and roof tiles, hoping to scare away real pests, rats, crows, thieves with quick hands. A quirk of old village life, the monster on your roof was sometimes your best defense. A softer detail catches your eye, a mural of children playing in a courtyard, chasing each other with painted cyclops masks strapped to their foreheads. Fear becomes a game here. A father laughs behind them, olive basket in hand. Maybe the lesson was subtle. Learn the shape of the monster young so it doesn't sneak up on you later. You imagine a village huddled during a sudden earthquake. The ground shivers, a roof beam cracks, whispers echo, Typhon stirs. An unlucky gust tears fruit from branches, must be harpies at it again. Some scholars argue these beliefs were the villagers' way to claim power over chaos. Better to point at a painted eye or claw than shrug helplessly at nature's shrug. You kneel to inspect a painted hearth at floor level. Inside, an old artist left a tiny Cerberus curled like a sleeping dog. No snarling three heads here, just a quiet reminder that even monsters can stand guard if you feed them well. Farmers might scratch Cerberus onto storage jars to keep mold and rats at bay, superstition as insurance. A smile flickers at the thought, the same dog that guards the gates of Hades reduced to a house pet if it keeps your grain safe through winter. Some historians remain puzzled at this domestic side of dread. Was it mockery or just acceptance that fear belongs at home as much as in the underworld? Your fingers brush the wall's faded edge, feeling the rough hum of stories kept alive in daily chores and evening prayers. Monsters here are woven into bread ovens and roof beams, myths that keep a family warm when the wind rattles the shutters. You step back, picturing villagers asleep in tiny stone rooms, comforted by the same terrors that once turned heroes to stone and storms to legend. Outside their doors, the real world waited, wolves in the hills, thieves on the road, sickness in the water. Inside, a painted Gorgon tongue stuck out, daring the dark to cross the threshold. One last look at these everyday wards, Then you slip down the hall toward the final lessons, where stories themselves become the chain that tames these fears, at least until the next child asks, "What if monsters are real?" And the telling must begin again. You leave the flicker of painted hearths behind, stepping into a chamber that feels like the heart of all these whispers, a place where stories themselves become the final tool, the last lantern against the dark. Here, the walls are plain. No snarling jaws, no wings or claws, just fading lines of script curling around old stone like ivy. Words the Greeks' sharpest weapon for taming monsters they couldn't outrun. You pause before an inscription, half lost to time. You trace the letters with your fingertip, feeling how each word once pinned fear to the page the way a spear pins a serpent to the dirt. The myths didn't just frighten, they soothed. They turned dread into a tale you could pass down by firelight, soften with a joke, twist into a warning. Fear retold becomes something you hold instead of something that holds you. A hush settles around you as you imagine parents gathering children close when storms battered the olive groves. The wind howled outside, so they spoke of Typhon chained far below. The thunder rattled the shutters, so they whispered that the Gorgons shrieked because they missed their sister. Each retelling polished the monster's scales a little duller until dread could be folded up like a blanket and tucked beneath a child's pillow. A tiny detail on the wall makes you smile, a scratchy image of a boy clutching a wooden sword pretending to be Theseus in the labyrinth. In the Greeks' world, pretending was practice, make-believe the Minotaur runs in circles, and maybe real fears learn to run too. Some historians remain puzzled that so many Greek myths end with monsters defeated, yet always left lurking just off stage. Maybe that was the point. Fear never truly dies, but you can rehearse its ending over and over. You kneel by a corner, where old scribes etched half-finished tales, cyclopes harpies, sirens drifting between lines of half-remembered battles and forgotten kings. No monsters here roar. They wait quietly, safe in ink. Some scholars say these scraps were lessons for apprentices, practice runs for bigger epics. Others argue they were protection charms in disguise, lines meant to keep the monsters small enough to fit inside a scroll. A breeze sighs through a crack in the wall, flicking dust from a shelf of clay tablets stacked like rough bricks. Maybe a child once pressed their ear to these stories, hearing the echo of old heroes promising that the chimera's fire could be snuffed out, that Cerberus's growl could be tamed with a lullaby, that Scylla and Charybdis could be outrode if you rode together. In villages, these stories passed mouth to mouth like bread. Some evenings, they made the monsters bigger 6 heads instead of 3, a roar loud enough to crack the sky. Other times, the teller shrank the nightmare to something laughable, the Cyclops tricked by a drunken goat, Medusa's snakes curling into silly knots when she slept. Fear twisted into a lullaby that carried you to sleep before the hearth's last ember faded. You stand brushing grit from your knees, feeling how the hush here is warm, not cold. Monsters are real in this chamber, but they belong to you. They answer to your telling, grow and shrink at the mercy of your voice. Some nights, you need them terrifying. Some nights, you need them tame. That's the trick the Greeks knew best. A monster named is a monster half defeated. A monster retold is a monster put to work. One last look at the scratched lines curling off into shadows, proof that even fear can be carved into soft shapes if you dare to speak it aloud. You turn now toward the final corridor, where this wandering through marble and myth winds down into quiet breathing and a promise that sleep is the oldest magic of all. The final corridor greets you, like a sigh. Cool air walls, hushed of monsters, roaring or hissing or snapping for your pulse. Here the stone is almost bare, save for a single mural. At the far end, a circle of people, cross-legged heads bowed together as if trading secrets in the dark. No claws, no wings, only the soft glow of a painted lamp flickering forever on the plaster. You step closer and realize this scene isn't about monsters at all. It's about the Greeks themselves, gathered in courtyards or around hearths, spinning their fears into thread. It was never just about Medusa's hiss or Cerberus's growl. It was about what came after the hush, the telling, the laughter, when the fire popped, and the scariest part was behind you. You pause, letting that hush settle into your bones. Somewhere behind you, in these painted halls, the Hydra still coils, the Chimera still breathes fire, Typhon still dreams his earthquake dreams. But here, they're silent, pressed between words and sleep. A tiny figure in the mural catches your eye, a child tugging at an elder's cloak, eyes wide, mouth open, mid-question. Maybe asking, then what happened? Maybe begging for one more twist, one more monster before bed. Some scholars argue that these tales were cautionary. Others claim they were tools of control. But a softer theory persists. Stories were comfort lullabies dressed up in scales, retelling the same fright again and again until it lost its teeth. A breeze drifts through a cracked window, high above, warm, now carrying the smell of old olive wood and faint candle smoke. You imagine the parents, whose voices shape these tales, leaning close to hush a child's shaking shoulders. There's a monster, yes, but listen, the hero was clever. The monster fell asleep. The labyrinth has an exit, if you know the thread. A small quirk of Greek daily life. Even adults use these myths to tame what they feared. Farmers muttered Scylla's name when storms threatened their boats. Midwives pinned Gorgon charms above cradles to keep sickness at bay. Fear made visible fear, made speakable, then fear made small enough to carry. Historians still puzzle over this gentle paradox. The same monsters, meant to terrify, became household guardians when shrunk to masks and charms. You kneel at the mural's edge, tracing a painted oil lamp glowing steady in the circle. The light flickers in your mind, steady flame in a world of shadows. Each word, each retelling another spark, pushing the darkness back just enough to sleep. Some nights, that was all the protection you needed. You stand once more, feeling the hush wrap around you like a blanket. The monsters never really left. Greek earthquakes still shake the earth. Storms still batter boats. Strange shadows still flicker at the edge of candlelight. But every time you tell their stories, every time you say, Hydra, Cyclops, Gorgon, you make the unseeable just a little smaller, a little softer. You take one last look at the circle of listeners. The painted elder lifts a hand mouth, half open, caught forever, on the cusp of another tale. You hear it now, your own voice picking up the thread. Once upon a time, a hero stepped into the dark, and in that, telling the dark steps back. So here, in this final corridor, you learn what the Greeks knew. Best monsters feed on silence, but they starve when spoken aloud. And when the story ends, fear curls up beside you, tame for now, until your dreams wake it again. You close your eyes. The marble fades. The oil lamp flickers out. You breathe softer now, letting sleep do what stories began taming, what frightens wrapping you in the oldest hush of all. But hushes don't last forever, somewhere deeper. The flicker reignites, tugging you back toward the whisper of another question, another coil waiting to be unspooled in the dark. Imagine a world where shadows hiss statues bleed, and every rustle in the dark could be a scaled tail brushing your heel. Greek myths never just threw a hero at a beast, they threw a puzzle. Who needs sleep when your dreams crawl with riddles, stone stairs, and serpentine coils that demand you outthink them or die? You'll hear of gorgon heads stuffed in sacks, hydras that grow two for everyone lost labyrinths, with no exit signs, and a trickster king who steered straight through teeth and whirlpools. This journey is less about the swing of a sword and more about the subtle turn of the mind. Maybe that's why these tales still lurk beneath our pillows, each hero's monster, just a fear we hope cleverness can tame. You stand at the threshold of the heroic age, where every legend begins, not with a sword drawn, but with a question asked. Why monsters? Why did Greek storytellers conjure creatures so ferocious that even gods raised an eyebrow? Some scholars remain puzzled by how these beastly foes grew from simple folk fears, wolves in the woods, snakes in the grass, into winged chimeras, breathing fire, or serpentine women turning men to stone. It's as if the Greeks knew that fear loves a flourish. You picture a young poet by a flickering oil lamp, weaving the first threads of a hero's quest. He looks out his window and sees not darkness, but possibilities, a cavern where a lion twice the size of any real beast sleeps beside a trail of half-cracked bones. A swamp where each ripple might hide a serpent longer than your street. The monsters grow with each telling details, stretching like shadows. The braver the hero, the bigger the beast. There's an odd comfort in this bargain. Monstrous threats justify monstrous courage. Heroes without monsters are just hunters. With monsters, they become immortal. This is the birth of the heroic quest, a pact sealed not by the hero's biceps, but by his cunning mind. Historians still argue whether these stories reflect real fears of the ancient wilderness or political warnings about letting one's guard down. Maybe both. So tonight, as you close your eyes, hold that thought. The true monster is never just the thing with claws and fangs, but the doubt you feel at the edge of the dark and the tiny spark of cunning you keep ready to light the way out. The oil lamp flickers again. This time, the shadows coil into the shape of a woman crowned with writhing snakes. Perseus stands across from her dagger, trembling in one hand, a polished bronze shield in the other. You already sense this won't be a fair fight, because fighting Medusa face to face is a shortcut to becoming garden decor for eternity. It's strange, isn't it? The Greeks made their monsters so lethal that a hero couldn't charge in screaming. He had to tiptoe through myths and cleverness instead. You picture Perseus, son of Zeus, and Danae, a youth thrust into heroism, not by choice, but by a king's cruel dare, bring me the head of Medusa. No map, no instructions, just a single, impossible task. Some scholars still debate whether Perseus was truly heroic or just a pawn of gods who enjoyed watching mortals play monster chess. So he wanders until he finds the gray three old sisters sharing one eye and one tooth between them. He doesn't slay them. He outwits them, slips their eye into his pocket like a pickpocket lifting a purse. Their secrets spill directions to the hidden lair where Medusa dreams and coils and hisses. Armed with winged sandals from Hermes, a reflective shield from Athena, and a curved blade sharper than royal gossip, Perseus flies toward the sleeping Gorgon. This isn't the roar of battle. This is the hush of a heartbeat slowed to a whisper. He inches closer, eyes locked not on Medusa herself, but on her backward reflection in the shield, an ancient hack, you could say, to avoid meeting a stare that would fossilize him where he stood. In the hush of that cave, imagine the drip of water echoing off stone, the faint scrape of metal on scale. One wrong glance, one slipped footstep, and Perseus joins the marble statues littered at her feet. Previous heroes, all muscle and no mind. When the moment comes, he strikes true. Not by brute force, but by refusing to look. Some say Athena guided his arm. Others say the gods simply watched and clapped from the clouds. There's no scholarly consensus on whether Perseus really believed he'd survive, or if he just trusted the mirror more than his own courage. You might think this is where the nightmare ends, but Greek myths love a twist. Perseus doesn't just bag the head and go home. He keeps it a trophy so potent it turns enemies into gravel with a glance. It rides with him, in a sack hissing softly in the dark, waiting to petrify a new threat. Maybe that's the real lesson here. Once you conquer one monster, you carry its ghost forever. As you drift deeper, picture the Gorgon's head, hidden in your satchel of dreams, a reminder that cleverness often demands you hold on to the very fear you've defeated. And somewhere in your own night garden of thoughts, a few small monsters lie coiled, waiting to be outwitted by mirrors and moonlight. Researchers continue to debate whether the Medusa myth hints at an older forgotten goddess, one whose worship turned into a cautionary tale once patriarchy reared its armored head. No one knows for sure. But tonight you're free to choose which story curls around your pillow, a hero's cunning triumph, or a whisper that monsters never truly die. The next echo of your lantern light flickers over another hero, one far less polite about monsters than Perseus. Heracles, or Hercules if you prefer the Roman twist, never met a beast he didn't greet with a club to the jaw. Yet even he discovered that some monsters can't be smashed, only survive through grit and cunning. Picture him now, a mountain of muscle draped in a lion's pelt, standing knee-deep in swamp muck, the air thick with buzzing insects and the reek of stagnant water. Before him coils the Hydra 9 serpent heads, hissing in concert, each bite venomous enough to fell a bull. Lerna's marsh holds its breath. You hold yours too, because this monster comes with a trick slice off one head and 2 sprout back in its place, snapping twice as loud. Some scholars remain puzzled why the Greeks dreamed up a creature that punishes brute force. Perhaps they needed a reminder that even the strongest can't win alone, or win at all, without changing their approach when brute strength fails. There's no scholarly consensus on whether the Hydra was always meant as an echo of corruption, an immortal threat that grows when attacked, or just a swamp terror born from fishermen's tales. So Heracles stands there, club raised, realizes he's about to make things worse, and does what no brute hero likes to do, asks for help. Enter Iolaus' cousin sidekick, Torchbearer, and arguably the real unsung hero here. As Heracles slices each head, Iolaus cauterizes the stump, with fire sealing the wound before another serpent sprouts. 2 against 1, monstrous math. In the night swamp, sparks fly, heads hiss, and the marsh sizzles with burned venom. One head remains immortal, lurking impossible to sever entirely. So Heracles does what any muscle-bound hero must. When the blade fails, he buries it under a rock. An eternal truth, under stone, left to hiss softly in the mud forever. Maybe you've got a Hydra or 2 like that, problems you don't solve, but suffocate under life's heavier stones. Imagine the quiet after the fight. Heracles leaning on his club, sweat dripping from his brow. The marsh once more calm, but never truly safe. He's not done, of course. This is only one of 12 labors the Oracle of Delphi commanded him to complete a penance for a rage that left blood on his hands. Historians still argue whether these labors were moral cautionary tales or just thrilling bedtime sagas for Greek children who liked their heroes half god, half broken. The Hydra wasn't even his trickiest beast. He'd chase the Ceryneian hind through endless forests, trap the Erymanthian boar, and later wrestle Cerberus from Hades itself. Yet it's this swamp serpent that lingers most in our minds, because here, brawn bowed to brains wielding a torch. So you, half lulled by whispers of the swamp, might wonder, what's your Hydra? What sprouts double when you strike it head on? Maybe it's the chatter that keeps you awake, or a worry that grows in the dark. Light a match. Find an ally. Scorch the stumps before they double back. In your dreams, tonight wander the misty edges of Lerna's marsh, where fire flickers and shadows hiss. Somewhere, Heracles is still there, club over his shoulder, torchlight flickering behind him, reminding you that monsters may multiply, but a clever flame can keep them at bay. A turn in the labyrinth now pulls you away from swamps and swaying serpents deeper into stone corridors where walls whisper secrets. Here waits Theseus young, restless a prince, with just enough noble stubbornness to volunteer for what everyone else called certain death, the Minotaur's maze. You stand with him at the mouth of the labyrinth, its entrance wide enough to swallow hope whole. Imagine the smell of damp stone, the stale breath of countless sacrifices who entered and never returned. In this twisting riddle of passageways lurks the Minotaur, half man, half bull, all hunger. Some say King Minos designed this prison to hide a family shame. Others believe the labyrinth itself was the true monster, endless shifting, and as merciless as the beast it contained. Scholars still bicker over whether Daedalus really built it so cleverly that even he nearly lost his way out. Theseus doesn't charge in swinging. He carries no map, no breadcrumbs. What he does have is Ariadne, Princess of Crete, secret ally spinner of fate in more ways than one. She slips him a ball of thread, spun from her private hope, that love might unspool a way back from the monster's jaws. The plan is as fragile as it is brilliant. Tie the end at the entrance trail it behind you, and when the beast is dead, if you live long enough, follow the thin lifeline home. Picture Theseus pressing a hand against cold stone walls, thread dragging over ancient dust. Every turn echoes with distant snorts and hooves. The Minotaur waits at the center, a riddle in muscle and horns. Some historians argue the bullman was symbolic of older rites and wilder gods, the raw animal force ancient kings feared yet needed. Or maybe it was just a story to explain dark rituals behind palace doors. No scroll settles it for sure. When they meet, it's not brute force alone that seals the Minotaur's doom. It's strategy dodging horns, baiting the beast into blind charges down dead ends, striking when its bulk heaves too far forward. You picture Theseus, heart-hammering blade flashing in the flicker of his torch. The stone floor drinks the echoes of struggle until the maze goes still, another monster laid low, not by the biggest sword, but by the slimmest plan. Yet this victory is layered with irony. Ariadne's thread saves Theseus, but does he save her in return? Some say he abandons her on an island asleep and dreaming of wedding veils. Some say he mourned her loss forever. There is no scholarly consensus on whether he was hero or heartbreaker, maybe both. Outside the labyrinth, the Aegean wind waits salty and free. Theseus unspools the last length of thread, stepping into sunlight as the first hero to escape the maze alive. You stand with him for a moment, the tang of salt in your nostrils, the hum of the sea, a promise that the worst monsters are not horns and hooves, but traps of your own making. So tonight, if you feel cornered by life's labyrinths, corridors of doubt, rooms echoing with your own footsteps, remember the thread. Someone's help, some small tool, one careful plan spun in darkness can unwind a path back to the open air. Sleep now, following that slender line through your thoughts until you too stand blinking at dawn. Beast behind you, freedom ahead. The air shifts again, salt spray creaking timbers, the hiss of waves clawing at a wooden hull. You drift onto Odysseus's deck, where cleverness is a compass, and every ripple hides teeth. The trickster king stands at the helm, eyes narrowed at the monsters lurking on either side, Scylla to starboard, Charybdis to port. If the labyrinth was stone, and shadows, this is water, and whirlpools, yet the same lesson hums beneath the waves. Brute force will drown you here. Odysseus's ship shudders as it nears the twin terrors. To the Greeks, these weren't just hazards on a sailor's map. They were the living edge of the world. Places where nature's hunger had a name and a snarl. Some scholars remain puzzled whether the myths sprang from real straits and whirlpools in the Strait of Messina or from nightmares scribbled by poets drifting half asleep under olive trees. Either way, the monsters endure. Scylla 6 heads on snaking necks, snapping sailors from decks like meat from a platter. Charybdis, a churning maw that swallows the sea whole, then belches it out in a spout that could drag an entire fleet down. There's no sword swing here, no club to smash a tidal force. Just wind canvas, and a captain's mind sharper than his blade. Odysseus orders his men to row harder than they've ever rowed oars, slicing black water under moonlight. He tells them half the truth: row this way, avoid that roar. He ties himself to the mast ears, stuffed with wax, for what good is a captain's plan if his own voice drifts siren-sweet toward the rocks? Some tales swirl together, mixing Scylla, Charybdis, and the sirens like a seaborne gauntlet. What matters is the trick. Don't fight what you can't fight. Outsail it. Outthink it. Lose a few men, save the rest. You picture the splash as Scylla plucks unlucky sailors from the deck, silent, sudden, a reminder that even the trickiest mind can't outwit every fang. But the ship sails on. Charybdis spins her fury, but misses her meal. A wake churns behind them. Proof that not all monsters must be slain. Some must simply be endured, long enough to slip past their teeth. Historians still debate whether Odysseus was the perfect Greek hero or just a charming liar who survived on luck as much as wits. His whole Odyssey drips with these half-wins, outwitting Polyphemus with a false name, dodging Circe's potions, whispering lies sweet enough to slip through the jaws of oblivion. Tonight, if your mind drifts to your own Scyllas and Charybdises, 2 threats you can't tackle at once, think of the mast, the wax, the ropes. Think of how sometimes surviving means steering closer to one monster to avoid the bigger one. A clever risk, not a perfect victory. As the sea grows calm and Ithaca flickers far on the horizon, remember that trickery isn't shameful when the tide's teeth snap at your hull. Sometimes cunning keeps the sail steady while brute force splinters the mast. And so, you drift with Odysseus' ropes, creaking above salt, crusting your lips, the monsters howling behind you as dawn glows ahead. Sleep comes like a wave here, rolling, slow rocking your little mine ship through narrow straits until you wake on softer shores. The sea wind fades, replaced by the sudden gust of wings overhead, a flash of hooves striking clouds. You look up, and there he soars, Bellerophon, mortal rider of Pegasus' hero, with eyes fixed on a monster stitched from nightmares, fire-breathing, triple-bodied the Chimera. If Odysseus mastered wind and water, Bellerophon learned to rule the air, riding a beast to outwit a beast. Picture him at dawn standing before the fountain where Pegasus drinks under pale starlight. Taming a winged horse isn't exactly in the average hero's training manual. Bellerophon didn't bribe Pegasus with sugar cubes he dreamt of the goddess Athena handing him a golden bridle. Some scholars remain puzzled whether this dream was a later flourish to link the hero to divine favor, or if it hints at older myths, where sky steeds carried shamans to the realm of spirits. Bridle in hand, Bellerophon creeps forward, whispers soft words, slides the bit over teeth that could bite through bronze. One toss of the mane, one powerful flap, and he's airborne earth, shrinking beneath the sun, a warm target at his back. Below the Chimera prowls a lion's head, roaring flames, a goat's head sprouting from its back, and a serpent for a tail, all three minds snapping and hissing at once. No hero on foot could hope to face such a stitched horror. But Bellerophon isn't on foot. From the sky, he spies the monster's weak points circling wide as the Chimera bellows smoke toward the clouds. There's no clash of armies here. No labyrinth walls or swamp traps, just one man and one horse dancing on air above fire and fangs. With each dive, he looses arrows, taunting the beast to burn itself out. One final swoop, a spear tipped in lead thrust down the Chimera's throat. The fire snuffs out as molten metal chokes the roar. Some say the ground where it fell still smolders the bones, half buried in volcanic rock. No scholarly consensus exists on whether the Chimera was a real echo of local volcanoes personified as beasts, or just a bedtime monster meant to show how humans dreamed of rising above the impossible. And Pegasus' faithful restless never truly tamed. Legends whisper that Pegasus outlived his rider, soaring on to carry Zeus's thunderbolts, or grazing clouds far from mortal reach. Bellerophon, though pride pricked him in the end. Flush with victory, he tried to ride Pegasus to Olympus itself. The gods, unimpressed, sent a gadfly to sting the horse. Bellerophon fell earthbound, once more crippled and forgotten. Only Pegasus rose higher. There's a quiet irony to this tale. Even when cleverness lifts you to the clouds, hubris can clip your wings. So tonight, as you dream of monsters below and skies above, remember that not every beast is on the ground. Some perch in your mind, whispering that you can rise higher than your humility allows. Listen for their hiss. Drift now on those beating wings, your thoughts coasting just above the dark Chimera embers, fading far below Pegasus, gliding on, untouched, untamed, carrying your sleep higher than your waking fears ever could. A hush settles as you drift from smoky skies back to the salt-tanged decks of a different voyage. This time the sail snaps in the wind, an oar creaks, and somewhere in the rigging, a hero squints at a swirl of feathers. Jason stands at the prow of the Argo Eyes, locked on the horizon, where the screech of harpies slices the wind like claws through silk. These monsters aren't beasts of brawn, but thieves of spirit-winged tormentors that steal what you never thought you'd lose: your last meal, your peace, your patience. Some scholars still puzzle over the harpies' origin. Were they spirits of sudden gusts, storm winds given claws and beaks, or symbols of guilt that snatch comfort away the moment you dare to rest? There's no tidy answer, just feathers in the dark. Jason's quest for the golden fleece already brims with backstabbers, fickle gods, and trials that turn crewmen's beards white before their time. The harpies arrive like an itch that won't heal. They descend upon blind King Phineus, who once angered Zeus by telling too much truth. Now, whenever he reaches for bread, the harpies swoop in, food-befouled scraps snatched away in mid-bite. It's hunger, by design, misery, by wing. Enter Jason and the Argonauts, rowers, heroes, tricksters in their own right. But even this band of muscle and muscle-bound egos can't simply skewer the harpies mid-flight. So they summon the Boread Zeets and Calais sons of the North Wind men with feathers on their ankles and vengeance on their minds. When the harpies shriek and spiral, the Boreads rise, after them, a chase through thunderclouds and salt spray. Some say the Boreads nearly killed the harpies outright. Others claim they spared them, striking a deal that exiled the monsters to a distant island far from any feast. There's no scholarly consensus on who truly won that skirmish hero's storm spirits, or the trickster winds themselves. What matters is that Phineas eats again, crumbs clinging to his beard, eyes blinking into the sun, after years spent blind and starving. For Jason, this trial is just one more knot in his tangled quest, a warning that monsters don't always roar in your face. Some flutter overhead, half seen, half felt, snatching comfort the moment you dare to reach for it. Like fears that circle when you think you're safe, they can't be clubbed away. They have to be chased, driven off, bargained with. Picture Jason leaning on the Argo's rail at dawn, the sails heavy with dew, the sea calm now that the sky is clear. He knows more trials lie ahead, dragons that never sleep, kings who lie with every smile. But for tonight at least, the harpies are gone. The bread is warm. The wine doesn't sour on his tongue. As you lie back into your own drifting vessel of dreams, ask yourself which harpies haunt you. The doubts that swoop in when you reach for rest. The gnawing worry that leaves your table bare. Somewhere in the darkness, your mind sends up a pair of feathered feet, swift enough to chase those shadows off for one more night. Let the oars creak, the sea hush, the wind die down. The Argonauts drift onward, beneath your eyelids bread in their bellies, monsters behind them, a fleece yet to claim but hope enough to sail on. The shadows grow deeper, now stone steps spiral downward, torches flicker low, and the echo of a lyre drifts past chained gates. Orpheus enters the underworld not with a sword, but with a song proving that sometimes monsters can be soothed instead of slain. You stand with him at the mouth of Hades, breath held waiting for the growl of three throats guarding the only exit back to life. Cerberus waits three-headed hound of myth fur, bristling with the musk of tombs, eyes gleaming like coals banked for winter. Some scholars argue whether Cerberus was truly meant to terrify mortals or simply remind them, once you pass this gate, you do not leave. Yet here comes Orpheus' harp, cradled like a weapon, forged of whispers and heartbreak. Orpheus is not your typical Greek hero. No shield, no armor, no cunning trap. Just strings and sorrow plucked into melodies that slip between Cerberus's snapping jaws. Picture the dog, now muscle-rippling claws, scraping marble, pausing mid-snarl as the notes curl around its ears. One head tilts, the second drools a dream, the third settles its chin on bone-paved ground. Some say the song was a hymn of loss for Eurydice, his love lost too soon to vipers and shadows. Others whisper it was a lullaby to remind death itself of life's sweetness. There is no scholarly consensus on how Orpheus found the perfect note, only that he did. He steps past the slumbering beast's feet, whispering against damp stone. Each chord softens, iron gates, coaxes shadows aside, pleads with Persephone and Hades for mercy no blade could win. They listen, gods softened for a heartbeat by mortal grief spun into music. But even a song can't tame every darkness. You remember how it ends. Eurydice's hand, in Orpheus's, a promise that if he does not look back, she will follow him into the sunlit world. Yet halfway up, doubt snags his heel. He glances over his shoulder. She fades back to shadow a dream, swallowed once more by the hound's snore. There's something cruel and cozy about this myth, a reminder that monsters can be calmed, but your own fear can wake them again. Historians still argue whether this tale warns us about trust about grief, or about the limits of art in a world built on loss. Maybe all three. Picture Orpheus now, harp strings, frayed eyes hollow, stepping back into sunlight alone. Cerberus resumes his growl tail, sweeping bones into neat piles jaws, clamping shut on the path behind the poet. No more song tonight. Only the memory that music can pass, where muscle cannot that some gates swing on notes rather than swords. As you drift deeper into your own underworld of sleep, maybe you hear a faint chord plucked under your pillow. A reminder that lullabies can soothe monsters in your mind, anxieties, regrets, half-formed fears, with three heads that snap when you turn out the light. Let Orpheus's melody hush them for now. So rest easy at this gate of dreams, your thoughts drifting past Cerberus's dozing paws. If a song can silence a guard dog of the dead, maybe your own hush can carry you through the worst of night's teeth, quietly, softly, until dawn peeks through your bedroom door. The hush of the underworld gives way to rustling leaves and the metallic rasp of bronze scraping scale. You stand now beside Cadmus, prince-turned-wanderer, the founder of Thebes, who never wanted a monster, but found one anyway, a serpent coiled around a sacred spring, fangs like daggers, eyes like molten gold. This isn't a labyrinth or a lair, it's an ambush waiting in the reeds. Cadmus's story slithers through Greek myth as one of the earliest dragon slayings. Unlike Heracles, Theseus, or Perseus, Cadmus didn't chase the beast for glory. He just wanted to find his sister Europa, stolen away by Zeus, disguised as a white bull. Some scholars remain puzzled whether the serpent was punishment for Cadmus's quest, or a test laid by the gods to plant the seeds of civilization where blood met soil. You picture Cadmus, now armor gleaming dull in the dappled sun spear tip, flicking between reeds. The dragon uncoils a hiss, like steam scales rippling through clear water. There's no divine helper here, no winged sandals, no trickster's riddle. Just Cadmus the monster, and a spring he must claim to found his city. The fight is short, but sears itself into legend. Cadmus spears the serpent's head, driving iron through scale and bone, each thrash spattering water red with the first drops of Thebes' future. But in Greek myth, killing the beast is never the end. It's only the invitation to stranger troubles. Athena appears not to scold, but to guide. She tells Cadmus to sow the dragon's teeth into the soil. He obeys, scattering fangs like seeds across the battlefield. From the earth sprout armored warriors, the Spartoi-born, fully grown, bristling with bronze and battle cries. The ground that drinks monsters' blood births new monsters. Men who fight each other until only 5 remain. These 5 become the founders of Thebes brothers by fang and furrow. Some historians still argue whether the dragon Cadmus slew was inspired by older myths from the East, where serpents guarded sacred springs, or if this was purely Greek imagination, turning chaos into city walls. There's no single truth, only the echo of fangs in the soil. Picture Cadmus now standing alone amid the last clinking of armor, settling into the dirt, the spring running clear again. He's not a hero with laurels and songs, he's a king with a city to build from the bones of beasts and brothers risen from teeth. a reminder that founding anything worth keeping city family dream sometimes begins with a monster you didn't ask for. So as you settle deeper under your blankets, think of the dragons curled around your own clear springs. Obstacles you never invited snarling when all you want is water and rest. Maybe you don't have a spear, but perhaps you have the stubbornness to plant your fear in the ground and watch something stronger rise from it. Let the hush return water trickling where blood once stained the stones. The serpent sleeps now in the soil, its teeth long gone, but its whisper, lingering new life, grows best from old fangs. And in your dreams tonight, may the monsters you face crack open the earth beneath you, leaving room for roots towers or quiet gardens, whatever you wish to build when dawn lifts its spear. The hush of springs and dragon's teeth now shifts to the crackle of underbrush and the low growl of something massive moving through the thicket. You find yourself alongside Atalanta, the huntress, with no patience for kings' fathers or foolish suitors who thought her strength was for show. In the tangled woods of Caledon, she stands toe-to-toe with a boar so fierce it turned fields to ruins and grown men to ghosts. Picture her at dawn, bow-strung hair tied back, breath misting in the cold air. Around her stumble the finest hunters of Greece, noble sons, and boastful warriors who underestimate the lone woman among them. Some scholars argue the Caledonian boar was more than just a monstrous pig. Some say it was Artemis's vengeance sent to punish a king who forgot to honor her altars. Others see it as a test, a riddle wrapped in fur and tusks daring mortals to prove themselves worthy. You hear the boar before you see it, branches snapping like bones under its hooves, tusks tearing bark from ancient oaks. The men ready their spears, but their courage leaks like water through a cracked jug. The boar charges. Men scatter. But Atalanta stands her ground, arrow-knocked eyes cold as marble. Her arrow flies first, blood clean and sure. The boar bellows, flanks wet with crimson rage, doubling its size in your imagination. The hunters close in, after her strike emboldened by what they now claim as a man's kill. But the truth sticks like a burr. It was Atalanta's aim that turned beast to prey. When the boar finally falls, spears piercing its heart, hooves kicking dust into the dawn, Atalanta stands silent, her bow resting against her shoulder, a ghost of a smile at the corner of her mouth. The prize boar's hide goes to her, the men bristling at the shame of it. Some mutter that a woman should never have led the hunt. Others whisper her name for centuries after proof that monsters don't care who holds the bow if the aim is true. Historians still debate Atalanta's place in myth. Was she a goddess's echo, a mortal who brushed too close to divinity? Was her story spun to tame wild women by folding them into heroic tales? There is no final answer. Just the rustle of leaves, the snap of a bowstring, and the thunder of tusks cut short by courage. Picture the forest clearing now, blood drying on fallen leaves, the boar's bulk already fading into legend. Atalanta walks away from the carcass, not to bathe in cheers, but to run again, feet pounding forest trails faster than hounds. She is freedom wrapped in flesh, an answer to every hunter who ever boasted that cunning and courage were man's alone. Tonight, as you drift further into the hush of your own wild woods, ask yourself what boars roam there. What bristling worries charge from the brush when you least expect it? Maybe your aim is steady enough. Maybe you, like Atalanta, need no permission to loose the arrow. Settle your breath to the forest's rhythm, branches creaking above leaves, whispering secrets underfoot. The beast has fallen. The hunt is done. and the woods for a moment hold only the sound of your heartbeat, strong, quiet, ready for whatever breaks the brush tomorrow. The forest hush fades into the echo of hammer on bronze, the hiss of oil lamps flickering over blades laid out like sleeping snakes. You now stand among the cluttered shadows of heroes' arsenals, rooms brimming with swords that never dull, shields that blind monsters, with sunlight sandals that defy gravity, and helmets that make kings invisible when the odds go dark. Greek heroes didn't fight fair, and that was never the point. Where brute strength trembled, talismans whispered secret paths forward. Perseus had his polished shield and winged sandals, Heracles, his lion's pelt and club, Odysseus, his cunning mind sharpened by Athena's timely nudges. Even the mightiest biceps came second to a borrowed trinket that turned a man into something more than mortal. Picture Hephaestus, the divine blacksmith, hunched over his forged firelight, dancing in his beard as he hammers out tools no monster can stomach. Some scholars still debate whether these divine weapons were metaphors for lost Bronze Age technologies. Real tricks of war spun into shimmering legend by poets who loved to gild a blade with godly fingerprints. Hold up a helmet in this imagined armory. Maybe it's Hades' helm of darkness, the cap that let Perseus slip past Medusa's sisters unseen. Or the bow of Heracles strung with tendons no mortal fingers could tie. Each tool a cheat code, a nod that brains could borrow brawn from the divine when mortal courage needed an upgrade. It wasn't just gear, it was guidance. Hermes, with his sly grin, handing Perseus sandals that defy gravity. Athena whispering over Odysseus' shoulder, turning a battered sailor into a chess master. Heroes gathered monsters' heads in burlap, not because they were fearless, but because they knew when to beg a god for a gadget. There's no scholarly consensus on whether these mythical tools were reflections of real-world charms, amulets tucked into tunics, lucky tokens tied around spear shafts, or pure narrative sugar for restless listeners. What endures is the message: every monster has a weakness. Every hero has a trick. Picture the flicker of a lantern catching the edge of a blade so sharp it could shave away nightmares. A jar of oil enchanted to burn longer than mortal fatigue. A cloak that hides your footsteps when fear hunts you down dark corridors. These aren't just relics in some marble museum. They're the promises we still carry: keys under pillows, lucky coins in pockets, whispered wishes to anything listening in the dark. Tonight, drift deeper into this arsenal of dreams. What tools do you keep beside your fears? A word that soothes a memory, that shields a plan so quiet it slips past whatever snarls at your door. Maybe your talisman isn't bronze or gold, but a soft ritual, a light left on a mug of tea, cooling on the nightstand, a story spun like a blade that cuts anxiety in two. In your sleep-forged forge, the monsters wait for brute force. What they never expect is the quiet flick of your clever mind polishing its shield in the dark. So breathe slow amid these shelves of myth and metal. Listen for the tap of a hammer somewhere in your thoughts. And remember, monsters flinch when they hear a tool whisper, "You didn't see this coming, did you?" Step softly now out of the forge's warmth and into the marble colonnades where whispers swirl like incense smoke. Here you find the hidden hands that tip the scales, divine helpers and sly tricksters' gods, who lean down from Olympus not to crush monsters themselves, but to slip mortals the edge they needed to outwit claws and fangs. Picture Athena, first owl-eyed armor, gleaming her fingers, brushing Perseus' shoulder as she gifts him the polished shield that turns death into reflection. She doesn't fight Medusa for him. She shows him how not to look straight at the problem. Some scholars still argue if Athena's meddling made the hero, or if the hero's cunning lured the goddess close. There's no single truth, only the rustle of wings and the faint scrape of bronze. Then there's Hermes smirking under his winged cap, sandals feather light ready to loan Perseus a flight plan or whisper riddles into Odysseus's ear. He's the trickster's trickster, the god who understands that monsters don't just bite, they bluff. Hermes is the grin you wear when you know the back door's unlocked. Not every divine helper shone so bright. Some came in riddles, dreams disguises by moonlight. Hera, often the villain in other tales, steps in for Jason stirring storms or silencing them if she wants his quest to float a little longer. Aphrodite sends love as a weapon, sometimes gentle, more often cruel. Dionysus wraps Orpheus's story in wine and grief, the song sweeter, for the sorrow he never shields him from. Imagine the monsters seeing all this, fangs, bared claws, ready only to find their prey armed, not with brute courage, but God-touched cunning. Some historians argue that these divine cameos were ancient PR for temples. Donate sacrifice, pray, and maybe you too will get a shiny shield when your own Gorgon hisses in the dark. Yet there's a sly lesson here. Even heroes didn't trust their muscles alone. They prayed, plotted, borrowed, begged. Their gods rewarded cleverness more than fists. Maybe that's the real riddle tucked in every hero's shadow. He never fought alone, never conquered purely by brawn. His prayers were half the sword. Picture the moment when Odysseus, adrift on Calypso's island, feels the salt wind of Hermes' arrival. No spear, no shout, just a gentle word, a nudge, a reminder that even the cleverest man needs saving now and then. Or imagine the grin Athena hides as she leans over a mortal's shoulder, whispering how to turn a curse into a key. There's no scholarly consensus on whether these gods were faith-made flesh or human cunning, dressed up in golden sandals. But in the hush between heartbeat and fear, you can hear the same whisper, you are not alone with your monsters. There's always a helper if you know where to look, a friend, a whisper, a chance that feels like fate nudging you in the ribs. Tonight, as you drift deeper, let your mind find its own divine conspirator, call it memory luck, intuition, or just the sly smile you wear when the darkness thinks it's won. Maybe you don't have Athena's shield or Hermes' sandals, but you have your version, a plan, a trick, a bit of grace that says, not tonight. Close your eyes under marble pillars that hold up the sky of your dreams. Somewhere out there, monsters are plotting claws, scratching the floor. But somewhere closer still, a helper waits, owl-eyed, wing-footed, ready to whisper your way through the labyrinth when the dawn is far. Slip with me now, through a different gate, this one carved from thoughts rather than stone. Here monsters curl, not in caves or labyrinths, but behind the eyes that dream them. Every scaled horror, every bristling boar, or many-headed snake, each one a metaphor, dressed in claws, waiting to remind us that fear wears many costumes when the world is dark. Picture the Greeks around a flickering hearth, stories spilling into shadows that dance across the walls. When they spoke of the Hydra, they whispered about problems that multiply when struck head-on. When they conjured Medusa's frozen stare, they hinted at terrors so paralyzing you'd rather turn to stone than face them awake. The Minotaur's twisting corridors, maybe a stand-in for choices so tangled that even clever feet struggle to find the exit. Some scholars still argue whether these beasts were born from the ancient forests and marshes that hid real predators, wolves, boars, big cats, or if they sprang fully formed from human dread. A way to explain thunder in the hills, shadows in the trees, or the flicker of something watching just beyond torchlight. There's no scholarly consensus on what came first, the monster or the fear that needed its shape. Imagine Bellerophon's chimera, stitched from pieces that shouldn't share a spine-lion-goat-serpent. A living collage of nightmares, warning that some threats don't fit neatly into one box. Or Cerberus, the triple threat that guards what you can't retrieve, loved ones' lost regrets unspoken. Even Jason's harpies shrieking away his comfort remind us that sometimes what torments you is invisible to everyone else. Monsters as metaphors have teeth that never dull. They remind us that humans invented these horrors to hold a mirror to themselves. Where brute strength shatters bones, fear gnaws on the mind. Where a hero swings a sword, the real battle is always under the helmet, turning dread into daring confusion, into a cunning grin. Picture for a moment your own monsters, quiet ones that slip under your bed when the lights go out. Maybe they don't breathe fire or grow new heads when cut down, but they linger at the corners of thought, debts unpaid, words, unsaid futures, unwritten. You can't club them, you can't behead them, but you can name them, and naming is half the taming. Historians still puzzle over why Greek myths turned so many fears into beasts rather than villains. Maybe it's because monsters can be beaten, outwitted, escaped, while human betrayal cuts closer to the bone. Monsters at least keep their teeth where you can see them. So tonight, let your dreams host these scaled metaphors. Let them hiss and coil, but never catch you. Remember that every monster you've ever met on a page, in a shadow behind your eyelids, was built from your own mind's wild need to wrestle fear into a form you could stand against. Breathe deeper now. The heroes of old knew what you know. The real fight was never with fangs and fur alone. It was with the creeping thought that monsters win when you forget they are only stories, shapes your mind can mold, shrink, and laugh at in the hush before sleep. Let the metaphors curl back into the dark soft as mist fangs dulled by your steady breath. Sleep holds the leash tonight. Monsters stay on their side of the hearth. Lean in closer now, past the snarl of scales and echo of fangs, because beneath every monster story there hums a single quiet truth. Greek heroes didn't survive these nightmares by muscle alone. They won because they learned to outthink claws sharper than bronze and mazes deeper than stone. Wit was the hidden blade in every hero's belt. Picture Perseus in that hush before dawn, peering at Medusa's reflection instead of her face. Not brute strength, but a borrowed mirror, and the nerve to trust it more than his sword arm. Or Heracles, standing knee-deep in marshes. Hydra heads flailing in a hiss of wet shadows. Even he muscle carved from divine pride paused to light torches and call for help, brains sparking where brawn fell short. Some scholars argue this thread of cleverness was Greece's true inheritance, a culture that prized cunning as much as courage. Homer's Odysseus wasn't the biggest, the fastest, or the strongest. He was the fox on the battlefield, spinning false names, slipping through sieges with a grin and a story for every locked door. Surviving Scylla's teeth and Charybdis's whirl demanded sails stitched from lies and wax-clever knots that bound danger tighter than any spear thrust. When Theseus stepped into the labyrinth, it wasn't his blade that saved him, but Ariadne's thread, a thin, winding thought stronger than any wall Daedalus could build. And when Jason stood on the deck of the Argo Harpies, screaming overhead, it was the promise of Bored's men, who could chase wind with winged ankles that cleared his table for one more meal. Trickery, teamwork, loopholes, these were the real weapons tucked behind the gleam of bronze. There's no scholarly consensus on why Greeks adored these sly victories. Some say it echoed their daily lives. Merchants haggling in crowded agoras, philosophers parrying questions sharper than daggers. Others claim it was reassurance that monsters, no matter how big or immortal, crumble when met with a mind that refuses to bow. Picture Atalanta too, her bowstring humming as she outran kings, and hunters' arrows loosed with precision that mocked the heavy shields of men twice her size. She didn't wrestle the boar to the ground. She found the gap in its charge, the single heartbeat where monster meets arrowhead. Wit was the real hero's armor, quiet, portable, invisible to the monsters waiting at the mouth of every cave. It's what turned fragile humans into something more than meat for claws and teeth. It's what turned the dark into a puzzle instead of a pit. And you? Your monsters might not breathe fire or guard labyrinth gates, but they hiss at the edges of your thoughts, tangled deadlines, old regrets, those looping worries that roar louder when the lights go out. You can't punch them into silence, but you can outthink them. A plan, a pause, a borrowed bit of wisdom tucked behind your teeth like a hidden blade. So tonight remember that the mightiest monsters the Greeks ever dreamed still flinched when wit stepped into the shadows. Sleep knowing your own cleverness is a shield thin as Ariadne's thread, bright as Athena's polished bronze. Not always obvious, never loud, but always enough. Let your mind settle on that quiet edge, where monsters fade into riddles and riddles fold under the soft grin of someone who knows that brains, not brawn, wins the final duel. The last echo of claw and cunning drifts forward now across centuries and screens into the soft glow of your modern world. Heroes who outsmart monsters haven't vanished. They've just traded marble temples for cinema seats and flickering tablets, their cleverness echoing through every story you half watch before drifting off to sleep. Think about it the moment a masked adventurer dodges a booby trap in some crumbling tomb. There's Theseus, with his thread slipping through another labyrinth. When a scrappy pilot loops a starfighter around a monstrous space leviathan, Odysseus, outmaneuvering Scylla and Charybdis all over again. Even your favorite detective, hunched over coffee and clues, is Perseus peering into polished glass, seeing the truth in reflections, rather than braving a head-on stare. Some scholars argue these monster-slaying echoes are no accident. We've been polishing the same myths for millennia, sanding off old scales, stitching on new wings, but always keeping that pulse beneath the plot. The real battle isn't brute force. It's the twist, the trick, the mind's final gambit. There's no scholarly consensus on whether we shape these heroes or whether they shape us, teaching each generation to see shadows not just as threats, but as riddles worth solving. Picture Bellerophon's chimera reborn in city alleys, any monster that spits flame, and fear only to be bested by a hero with an unexpected angle. Or Heracles' Hydra creeping into your newsfeed, every rumor or worry that multiplies when you try to chop it down head-on until someone finds the match to cauterize the wound, the friend to hold the torch. Even the metaphors live on. Cerberus is the firewall guarding secrets behind digital gates. The Minotaur is the maze of bureaucracy you navigate with clever threads of paperwork and patient strategy. Monsters still lurk jaws open, waiting for anyone who dares to brute force through them instead of pausing to think. And the heroes? They're not demigods anymore. They're you tangled in deadlines, outwitting small disasters with a grin and a plan. The mirror shield is your second cup of tea when your mind wants to freeze. The winged sandals are the stolen 5 minutes of calm that lift you above the day's growl. The thread is a whispered reminder that no maze is endless if you have even one true clue to hold on to. Tonight, as you curl deeper under your covers, remember that you've been living with these myths all along. Every time you dodge an argument that wants to snare you like a labyrinth, every time you slip past a snarl of problems with a soft word or a hidden plan, another monster outwitted another echo of ancient Greece, humming quietly in the back of your mind. So let the lights dim. Let your monsters sleep in their caves of half-forgotten dreams. If they wake, meet them not with fists clenched, but with the gentlest weapon. There is a thought turned sideways, a question whispered in the dark, a plan spun so soft it slips through teeth and claws like smoke. You've wandered with Perseus, Heracles, Theseus, and Odysseus. You've borrowed their tools, cracked open their riddles, carried their cleverness forward. And now, as the last whisper of scales and stone fades, carry this with you too. Monsters may be old as fear itself, but your mind is older than your worry, and twice as cunning. Sleep now, hero. The beasts are quiet. The story closes its teeth around a smile. Let your breathing slow as the final echoes of myths drift into a hush. Imagine the shadows softening the monsters, curling back into ancient stone and tangled woods where they belong. Heroes set down their shields beside your dreams. Your thoughts tiptoe past sleeping beasts on padded paws. In this calm, your mind folds over itself like a quiet wave replaying the clever tricks, the laughter in labyrinths, the hush of winged sandals brushing starlight. You have carried cunning through mazes, across seas into caves. Let it rest now as the dark settles into the gentlest silence. No more quests tonight, no riddles to solve. Only your heartbeat steady and slow, threading you back to warmth and softness. If you'd like to wander these old paths again, you can always return quietly, softly, whenever your monsters need outwitting once more. And before sleep fully claims, you leave a sleepy trace behind if you wish. Your city, your hour, your favorite mythic trickster, whispered below, safe with the hush.